So, back in 2019, when all was good with the world and nothing horrifically bad of any sort was on the horizon that could change our world in any way possible, Netflix decided to unveil its brand new teen drama titled Sex Education, a completely unique show consisting of teenagers in college with an emphasis on sex. And I thought, great, just like Riverdale, 13 Reasons Why, Pretty Little Liars and The Vampire Diaries, this show will probably add nothing new to the mix and will not only romanticize controversial things, but also be a giant disappointment. So that's what happened, right? Well, not exactly. Sex Education kinda came out of left field and absolutely destroyed my expectations of Netflix's typical pile of garbage by gracing the internet with what I consider to be one of the most relatable teen shows in the past 10 years. Sex Ed's formula managed to break the mold on what defines a popular teen drama by not having overly sexualized teenagers. Yes, I'm talking about you, Riverdale. Also by managing to avoid making teenage years look like the most unbearable and taxing years of your life. Unlike a show which makes me question the creator's mental state. Sex Education was simply a show which discussed the fears and insecurities that the characters felt when it came to finding out about sex for the first time. There was drama, sure, but the show wasn't about who murdered who or about any missing people. The show simply tackled scenarios which many teenagers have found themselves in their lifetime. It portrayed the fear of being seen naked, not being able to perform good oral sex, and how to carefully partake in douching. This modern and, quite frankly, relaxed portrayal of what discovering sex for the first time can be like for so many is exactly what made the show stand out from its peers. Its grounded nature allowed itself to slow down and almost tell the audience that, hey, we know the birds and the bees can be a little bit daunting. Don't worry about it. No one has it figured out and no one makes it look cool. But like any show which performs well, it wouldn't be able to do that if it weren't for the characters. And if it wasn't already clear, I will definitely be spoiling this show, so here's your warning. Get out now if you haven't seen it. I recommend just going away, watch the entire show, then come back. Otis Milburn is the show's protagonist, although I'm a little hesitant to call him that after the later seasons, solely due to the variety of the cast and screen time, but whatever. Otis is your typical nice guy. He doesn't judge anyone and is happy to remain unnoticed. He's an outrageous virgin, with his fears surrounding sex being so fierce he can't even masturbate without having a panic attack. Of course though, Otis has a secret power. He's a sex guru when it comes to knowledge and therapy. After accidentally helping the school's bully one day, he gets thrown into the school spotlight by partnering up to create the school's sex clinic. Although he does it mostly for the girl who, more or less, scares him into doing it, who he likes, which leads us nicely into the next character. Maeve Wiley is the badass mean girl who gives zero fucks. She's got an unfortunate family upbringing, shocker, but is actually one of the smartest students in the school. Maeve witnesses Otis's sex wizardry when he comforts the school's resident asshole and decides that there is a money-making opportunity here. Clearly understanding society better than any teenager in the real world, Maeve sees that the students of Moordale High desperately need the help Otis is able to provide and decides, due to the good Samaritan she is, that she will help him schedule the appointments. Nah, she really just wants the money. Eric Effiong is Otis's best friend and the living embodiment of good vibes. He plays the role of the eccentric gay best friend, but to be fair, does play it quite well. Unlike many other teen shows, we don't see a sad story of Eric coming to terms with his sexuality. He instead just fucking owns it. Eric loves his eccentricity and yearns to emerge from the banner of being unnoticed, unlike his best mate Otis, which is clear from the clothes that he wears down to his unfazed social awareness. Eric's character struggles actually concern the world accepting him for who he is, like his church, family, and peers. This isn't exactly a new formula, but it definitely feels like it is. Maybe because it's not exaggerated and more realistic? I'm not sure. All I know is that Eric's struggles are an amazing take on the struggles of sexual identity. Jackson Marchetti is Moordale's golden boy. He's head boy, their most successful competitive swimmer, kind to all, is the show's only conventionally attractive male character, and has the charisma of Elvis Presley. Jackson's the guy who was supposed to have it all together. He's excelling in sports and is in a position in his school which earns him more credits for university, but he's not actually happy. Turns out, Jackson has actually been on anti-anxiety medication since he was a kid and doesn't actually enjoy swimming anymore. He only does it because of the pressure from his mother making him feel trapped. He's actually quite a sad character, but we'll discuss him more in a little while. Oh, and here may the fuck. Adam Groff is Moordale's big bad bully. He's quite dormant behind the eyes and takes very mature and complex ways to articulate his emotions. Adam actually has it quite difficult. Where in other shows the bully is a product of their bully father, Adam shares the same problems, but slightly differently. You see, Adam's father is the headmaster of the school, placing him in a position of feeling like a disappointment while simultaneously being degraded by his father's sharp critiques. Adam's father, Michael, is not the typical abuser of his child, but one could most certainly provide a cohesive argument suggesting that his actions are just as damaging than any belt, if not more. Michael has turned his own son into the bully that he is, and then proceeds to detail his disappointment in him even further. Adam's character is actually quite tragic, and is portrayed in a much more sympathetic way, allowing audiences to really feel his pain. He's also bisexual. Yeah, didn't manage to avoid that stereotype. But in this case though, it works. Amy Gibbs is the airhead character, often spouting something outrageous or misreading social settings. Amy could have easily been a forgettable character with a few little laughs here and there, but maybe due to the performance of Amy Lee Wood, Amy actually becomes a complex and sad character. She's actually used to portray the idea of a woman never being cared for and more to be used, but eventually she becomes a lovable character who learns to respect herself. Jean Milburn is Otis's mother, a very confident woman with what seems like 100 PhDs in sexual education and therapy. Jean's the over-invasive mother who hasn't yet understood that her son is becoming more and more embarrassed by her attempts to connect with him.
I've noticed you're pretending to masturbate, and I was wondering if you wanted to talk about it.
Her character serves as the bridge between the teenagers' world and the adults, often de-escalating situations surrounding sex or relationship troubles. Her relationship with Otis is clearly quite delicate. The two are almost incapable of speaking without it ending in an argument, but it's so well done. Otis and Jean are an amazing duo who, in my opinion, expertly convey how difficult it can be to grow up without being able to carefully communicate feelings, concerns, events, and beliefs. Their relationship is incredibly fractured due to the absence of Otis's father, and both the actors kill it in these roles. Ruby is the head girl of the popular group. She's a snarky bitch. That's about it. Now, before anybody comes at me saying something like, "How can you say that about Ruby?" or "What about Lily?" Firstly, my opinion, so haha. And secondly, I feel like characters like Lily didn't majorly impact the story. They sort of had their own mini-series, which weren't too connected to the overall storyline. And Ruby? She really didn't have a story or personality in the first season. It's for this reason I won't really be mentioning them, at least just yet. I'm sorry if this decision keeps you up at night. Okay? Okay, great. Sex education's characters are something that I would say is very rare in modern teen dramas. Mainly because they don't feel like characters, while simultaneously feeling like some of the best written characters I've ever seen in a modern show. Now I know that sounds like a contradiction, because it is, but hear me out first. When it comes to good storytelling, characters are defined by their actions and morals. Sex ed's characters' actions and morals are fantastic for one main reason. They feel real. It's that simple. Whereas in shows like Riverdale, where you have the head of a notorious biker gang be the photographer for the school paper who likes to write stories on an old typewriter, Sex Education chooses to take a grounded approach in its characters. Their attitudes, actions, words, and relationships never felt contrived or forced. Each scene naturally plays out how people would react in real life, and this is exactly where the contradiction comes in. In my opinion, Sex Education's characters are written so well that you, or at least I, sometimes forget that they aren't real people. They're only playing a part. Yet I'm convinced that when growing up and going through high school, I knew at least 3 Otises. The characters really are the driving force of this show. Not the setting, not the rules of the universe, not the supernatural lay of the land, just these awkward characters who just want a bone. Having said that, this seems like a perfect time to jump into the setting and atmosphere of the show. The setting of Moordale really is a fantastic example of what it's like to grow up in the UK. I personally feel like this is something which is a real gap in the market of teen shows. The UK, outside of London, really isn't a massively portrayed landscape. Yes, we've got shows like The In-Betweeners, but that's not really a show to admire and feel connected to. You know, that's more of a comedy of what it's like to not enjoy being a teenager. Sex Education is the opposite of that concept. Moordale is so clever in its appearance and atmosphere. Just think about it for a second. The setting of Moordale High is so vibrant and full of life. It's almost like the school and its appearance are attempting to embody what it's like to feel excited and intrigued about sex and growing up, with the stark contradiction of the rest of Moordale seemingly being made more of simplistic colours. The high school has such a welcoming atmosphere which can't help but be noticed. Eric is still somehow, though, brighter than everything else in the show. I'd also like to point out that, besides the Vogue magazine levels of fashion on display, Moordale's whole vibe is so familiar to someone who was 17 when the show first aired. Its overwhelming feeling of excitement and lack of anxiety at times really captured what it felt like to be living in the age of spending endless amounts of time doing ultimately nothing but enjoying the company of your friends, then also accurately describing the daunting thoughts of what it feels like to think about the future and what you're going to do with your life. Managing to balance both of these sides of the weighing scale is something that's not easily achieved, yet Sex Education seemingly did it without any real issue. It's something I hope more shows are able to replicate in the future. Yes, the whole point of the media and cinema is great to be able to escape from the boredom that is reality, yada yada yada, but sometimes seeing something so accurately reflect what many consider to be the best years of your life helps put into perspective how you can live them. I'm not saying that the show had an existential message about the meaning of life, but it definitely had connotations which some people, myself included, were able to learn from and assist in our levels of judgment. This is a credit I have never been able to give to any show I have previously watched before. I think it's definitely unique to sex ed, but also not unattainable for others in the future to claim for themselves. The final major credit I want to give to the show is its relaxed view on normalizing diversity. Seriously, why is it that Sex Education is the only piece of media I have seen in recent years that actually manages to incorporate legitimate diversity? In every project that seems to be made at the moment, the diverse range of casting characters are nothing more than what makes them tick the diverse criteria box. The gay character is actually a compelling character who has his own storyline, instead of being the two-dimensional tick box only there to remind people that he's gay. God, I really am going in on Riverdale. The show normalizes same-sex marriage, same-sex relationships, other sexualities, race, other areas of diversity like sexual fantasies. No one is reduced to one sole thing. They all have great character development, and something which I really do enjoy seeing is how it never appears to be a point of focus for their struggles. Yes, they can sometimes be linked, but their other struggles and hurdles aren't necessarily connected. Take Jackson, for example. Both his parents are women. Two mothers. Surely this means that people attempt to give him a hard time for that. Right? Wrong! Jackson's mothers are both excellent characters, and I don't think their relationship is brought up by anyone other than Jackson throughout the span of the entire show. That's so refreshing. It allows for Jackson's character to deal with struggles larger than some asshole called my parents lesbians. He instead has worries like, if I stop swimming, will my non-biological mother feel less attached to me as it was something which we did together? Now, that is a storyline. That right there is an excellent way to show what real emotions and struggles the children of same-sex marriages can have. Yet another way of Sex Education managing to really hit home with their audience. If Sex Education was ever able to do one thing right, it was this. It was just simply fantastic. Seeing that I've already started talking about characters, let's continue that trend. Right, now this is your final chance. If you haven't watched Sex Education, this is exactly where I recommend leaving. I will be spoiling the entire show. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, let's finally discuss the story. Considering that I've seemingly done nothing but praise the show so far, surely I think it's amazing from start to finish, right? Actually, no. You see, if you have forgotten, I titled this video, How Sex Education Lost Its Identity. Doesn't really sound like I'm only interested in praising the show, does it? For context, Season 1 and 2 I think are great. It's when Season 3 and 4 came out I really started seeing the change in the show, so let's start with the good stuff. Seasons 1 and 2. In Season 1, Otis and Maeve end up creating a sex clinic after Maeve witnesses Otis's skills in sexual therapy. It's a solid premise. However, we slowly begin to watch Otis fall for Maeve, and also Maeve for him. The season primarily focuses on them, but it takes time to flesh out its other characters. Eric is struggling with his family accepting his very forward presentation of his sexuality with makeup and fashion. His father in particular struggles the hardest and they clash quite a lot. Eventually, however, Eric learns that his father is just trying to protect him. To his surprise though, it's actually Eric who influences his father and they grow together. It's a beautiful story. Jackson is head boy. His future's looking promising with his swimming abilities and everyone loves him. His life is great. After he and Maeve started having casual hookups, Jackson decided that he sees a lot more in her. Throughout the season, he does his best to prove to her that they could be something more, but fails due to Maeve's closed personality. That is the case, however, until he takes advice from Otis on how to really impress her, which Otis accidentally gives. Upon getting closer to Maeve, we learn that Jackson actually isn't perfect. He's been on anti-anxiety medication since he was 11, and he's no longer sure whether his interest in swimming is still there. He explains that he's really struggling from the pressure that everyone is putting on him, and he feels like he's suffocating. This is where we learn of Jackson's fear of upsetting his non-biological birth mother, as it's something which they share together. It's a really strong story and makes you feel for the character. Okay, Adam. Adam starts the season as your typical bully. He has very little personality other than the fact that he's not a good student, is seemingly absent-minded, and is a disappointment to his father. Although later in the season we actually learn that Adam's anger may be the result of him repressing his true self, that being a bisexual. He hits it off with Eric at one point in the season, creating a new lens in which to view his character. Amy's story in Season 1 is a little bit different to the rest of the characters. Right from the get-go, she is a people pleaser. She does anything and everything that people ask of her and is happy as long as she's making someone else happy. She's part of the popular group, but sticks out like a sore thumb. She's kinder than the rest and is secretly friends with Maeve, while also dating Adam, who doesn't treat her the best. This actually presents her in a position, though, where she's almost selling herself. It's not until she meets a man called Steve when she realizes that she is worthy of respect and that she should try to care for herself some more. After realizing this, she stops being friends with the popular kids and is happily best mates with Maeve, while also starting a real relationship with Steve. Michael Groff is Adam's father and the headmaster of the school. In the first season, admittedly, he doesn't exactly have a story. The first season is more or less a foundational basis on what will eventually become Michael's story. For the sake of this analysis though, I'll attempt to give him some description. He's fucking miserable. The man seemingly can't stand his son and looks like an unbearably depressing person to live with. This will get better though, I promise. Jean Milburn, as previously established, is Otis's mother. She's a licensed sex therapist who is very confident in her single relationship lifestyle. She wants to be a good mother for Otis, but can't relinquish the idea of control. Not to mention that the woman just doesn't understand the concept of boundaries.
Otis, open the door, please! Leave me alone!
Jean's character begins to flesh out a little bit more though when she meets Jakob, plumber turned lover. We learn that Jean was once happily married with Otis's father, but after he cheated on her, she left him. Since then, Jean has struggled to let anyone into her life any more than the casual fling she has with her patients, which is so unprofessional, but I guess, go Jean. Jakob is the first real connection she's had since. It's messy, but it looks like it can help her grow, so we'll roll with it. Returning to Otis and Maeve, their relationship as friends takes multiple different turns throughout the season as we slowly see them fall for each other, whether they'll admit it or not. Because of their stubbornness though, Maeve ends up starting a relationship with Jackson, which falls apart, and Otis starts a relationship with Ola, Jakob's daughter. The season ends on Otis and Ola sharing a kiss while Maeve bears witness. She came to admit her feelings after realizing just how strong her emotions towards him were, but it was too late. It's a pretty solid ending and it leaves the viewers in anticipation for season 2. You may notice that I haven't really introduced Ola as a character yet either. It's mainly because I don't think she's a particularly compelling character. and it's a little bit because I can't stand it. Following these characters throughout Season 1 is amazing. They really feel like actual people, and when seeing their personalities fleshed out a little bit more, you can really get connected to them. Season 2 feels like a natural continuation of Season 1. The characters are still growing and making mistakes, yet the story still feels grounded and very, very realistic. Otis is learning how to be a better boyfriend to Ola, while trying to ignore his real emotions towards Maeve. Yikes. This doesn't exactly work out. He and Ola break up, and he ends up sleeping with Ruby at a party. Maeve creates a new relationship after her heartbreak over Otis at the end of Season 1, with a new character called Isaac, one of the worst additions to the show ever. Her mother also returns. She brings along Maeve's little sister and is now clean and trying to be a better mother to both of the girls. Jackson actually causes extreme harm to himself to avoid swimming instead of telling his mother the real reason, which means he has to start taking lessons with a new character, Viv, to increase his study scores. Eric begins a relationship with a new character, Raheem, while having confused feelings towards Adam. Amy has a traumatic SA on a bus and spends most of the season dealing with the psychological trauma of it. Jean is attempting to let go of her confident exterior and begins a real relationship with Jakob until she breaks and they come to an end. It's also around this time where Jean finds out that she's pregnant and struggles to tell Jakob. Michael is losing control of the school, his job, and his relationship with his wife, and Adam is put through several instances where he is trying not only to find his footing, but his identity. Even though this is a very quick overview of the season, I'm just trying to highlight one thing in particular. Really small, just one little thing, and that is, how real does this feel? My God, this season managed to retain its charm, all the while introducing new and much darker themes, which some people have gone through themselves. It would be easy, by incorporating these new themes, to forget that the show is a comedy and more light-hearted, but nope, they don't forget it. Instead, they managed to create a good balance of lighter and darker themes. Just like Season 1, each character has multiple loops to go through, which not only feel fitting, but also engaging. You know, seeing something which could typically be quite unengaging is actually framed in a way which generates certain feelings within audience members that can be completely unexpected. Take Jackson, for example. Watching him describe how he feels nervous to tell his mother he doesn't want to swim anymore is sad, sure, but watching him deliberately throw his hand under a weighted machine and breaking it to avoid that conversation is a horrifying thing to witness anybody doing. Then, with Amy, they showed the reality of the trauma. She is scared of intimacy now, and she struggles to even keep herself together when in public. This, to me, is what made Sex Education stand out and be unique from Netflix's department of dreary teen dramas. Where shows like 13 Reasons Why would romanticize dark and upsetting themes, Sex Education humanized them while showing them what they are: scary and upsetting. Something which I think other show writers have forgotten. You know, to me, this was the first of Sex Ed's two most defining characteristics. What's the other, I hear you ask? Simple. I've already touched on it a few times. The comedy. You know, to put it simply, this show is hilarious. The characters each have their own presence, which brings their own comedy, sure, but the overarching feeling of comedy on the show is there regardless. It amazes me how a show manages to convey such compelling characters with deep and confusing emotions and thoughts, while continuously reminding the audience how funny and very uncool they can really be. Which, again, I feel like is sorely absent from too many teen pieces of media. I'm sorry, but your teenage years are supposed to be fun. Sure, exams suck, the hot girl you like thinks you're unattractive, your car insurance is draining your entire bank account, living at home is getting more and more difficult, blah blah blah, but they're fun. Riverdale, Pretty Little Liars, 13 Reasons Why, they all take on this grander than teen experience of teenage years where you're always surrounded by death, drugs, murder, assault, hatred. Am I the only one who never felt this level of existential dread? Am I the weird one for thinking that teen years aren't anywhere near as over the top as these shows try to make them? Because I'm starting to think that somehow my experience is the anomaly. This is why Sex Ed was so important. It reminded you how being a teenager is fun. The years you spend in them, they're fun. They're not something to fear, but instead something to embrace. The show also managed to finish on a brilliant cliffhanger. Otis leaves Maeve a voice message where he admits her feelings for her. Oh, amazing. We're finally going to see these two get together, and oh, for God's sake! Isaac deletes the voice message before Maeve learns of it, therefore keeping Maeve in the dark and Otis feeling ignored. This was a shitty move, but damn, does he get us excited for next season? Yes, it does. Okay, I think this is it. I think this right here is the stage where I stop praising the show. You see, when Season 3 was released in 2021, something immediately felt different about the show. It was difficult at first to pinpoint exactly why things felt a little off, but eventually I did have an inclination. Before we get onto that, however, let's see where our Brits find themselves this season. At the end of Season 2, little shit Isaac deletes the voice message left by Otis for Maeve without either one of them knowing his actions. When they finally return to school, neither one of them is aware what Isaac has done. Instead, they think the other person is attempting to stay away on purpose. It's a little annoying to see them go through the same emotional hoops as they did in the previous 2 seasons, but surely they'll get together soon and we can rest easy knowing it's gonna happen. Oh well. Anyway, after Michael Groff's failed attempts to hold on to his job as head teacher, new headmistress Hope steps in and proceeds to turn Moordale High into a military school with, ironically, regressive social rules, which she believes are going to turn the school into a shining symbol of excellence and progression. Another solid premise from the show writers. Otis and Ruby are now a couple. Interesting, but because he can't get over Maeve, he ends things with her. This is something which a lot of people obviously hated, but I didn't really mind it. In truth, even after her background is explored a lot more, I still struggle to like Ruby as a main character. Shoot me, I know, I just don't like her. I just don't like her. Anyways, Maeve started hooking up with Wankstain over here for some reason. That's really it for her. Maeve does eventually find out what Isaac did with a voice message at some point, but she's weirdly calm about it. They do eventually break up, so that's a win, but that's pretty much everything. The only other notable thing regarding Maeve this season is her mother losing custody of Maeve's little sister after returning to drugs. I'm sure nothing bad will happen following this. Jackson loses head boy status and begins falling for a new character called Cal, more on them later, but it doesn't go the way he wanted it to go. They eventually have a spark, but it doesn't amount to anything. He also tries drugs. Real exciting direction there. Adam and Eric are now together, and it's amazing. It's funny to think that the character who initially had no major likable qualities like Adam changed into one of the most beloved characters in the show. We love to see it. Eric clearly doesn't though. He's struggling with Adam coming to terms with his sexuality in quite an unfair manner. They end up breaking up in a nice way though, where no one's at fault. Oh, sorry, I misspoke that. Eric cheats on Adam when he goes to visit his family in Nigeria with the first gay man he meets, and then decides that he and Adam need to break up because Adam isn't fully out yet. I hate this. I feel like the writers took the easy option of just placing them apart instead of trying to write an interesting conflict for the couple to actually overcome. I don't know, felt a little cheap. Amy is still struggling from the effects of her trauma from last season, which eventually results in her breaking up with her boyfriend. I think her story was handled pretty well here, I won't lie. I think they're definitely on the right track to wrap it up neatly in the final season in a way which can neatly bring both her and the audience to a nice, comforting end. The new headmistress, Hope, is brought in to fix the school, but fails so spectacularly that the school itself shuts down, meaning that our characters will find themselves in a new setting for their final years of study. Michael in this season finally gets some respective spotlight. Only took 2 whole seasons. So, after losing his job in the last season, as well as his wife kicking him out, Michael is now in the position of self-acceptance and recovery. It's honestly amazing. This is also something which feels rare. The deeply self-loathing and sad man who wants to improve himself, and, can I say, I think they have done it brilliantly. Groff went from a boring character who just seemed grumpy to a character who actually has demons. He spends the season coming to terms with himself and trying to find his spark, which turns out to be cooking. Awesome! He also begins to stop hating himself after he finally confronts his dickhead, and much more successful, older brother Peter. In an outburst at a dinner, Michael admits that his brother has been a big factor in his misery. He decides, rather dramatically, that he will no longer deal with his brother's appalling attitudes towards him and says goodbye for the final time. I'm sorry, but this was the amazing start Michael needed for the growth of his character. The man's character arc over the course of season 3 is brilliant. It's so nice to see a father trying to do better for both his wife and his son. To me, that will never get old. Love it. Jean finally gives birth to Otis's new stepsister, Joy, and she and Jakob decide to co-parent the child together, a decision which is influenced by an accident during the childbirth where Jean almost died. Viv, the character who was tutoring Jackson in the previous season, becomes head girl under the new headmistress's iron fist and becomes almost a puppet for enforcing her actions. And finally, Ruby really opens up from her mean girl exterior. Turns out she's actually not from money and has spent so much of her life being bullied that she has found herself becoming the bully. This is something which many people instantly fell in love with and gave a lot of sympathy for, but again, I struggled. I'm not even sure why. I think this is a character I'm just doomed to never love. Season 3 concludes with two major things. 1. Otis and Maeve finally admit their feelings for each other while on a school trip in France. And 2. Just when you think they're finally going to get together, Maeve is offered a place to study in a prestigious program in America. 3 seasons in, and the will they won't they couple still won't be together. This is beyond old now. And that's it. That's pretty much the main storylines this season. They were okay, but nothing really stood out to me besides Michael's progression. I was a little skeptical after the season for what they were planning with season 4, with Otis's love interest now in America and all the current students in a new school all of a sudden. The show kind of felt like it instantly changed a couple of its core principles. No longer did it feel like a natural progression. It now feels like more of a shock value change of events. So, what are the biggest problems with this season in my opinion? Firstly, I feel like the show is beginning to forget some of its characters' morals. Eric, a kind soul who knows how difficult it can be to come out, ridicules Adam about him struggling to do the same with his own family, and then decides that the best thing to do is cheat on him? I'm sorry, did the writers forget who Eric is? Season 1 Eric would never ever do this. You'd expect the character who has struggled for years trying to get people to accept the real him to be more compassionate. Maeve should have wanted to do something along the lines of this to Isaac. But instead is only angry at him for a while until deciding to forgive him for his actions. I'm sorry, but for a character who loves to say that she doesn't trust people and nobody gets her, she really doesn't seem to offer much consequence to betraying her trust. And Jackson's only real purpose this season is to like a new character who doesn't like him back. Which brings me to the second thing I disliked about this season. How the writers stopped normalizing diversity. If you've seen the show, you'll most likely know what I'm about to go on about. Cal Bowman is introduced to Mordale High as a new character this season. They are non-binary, and actually that's all there is to them. Had this character been introduced in previous seasons, the writers hopefully would have attempted to give them a story. However, in this season, Cal exists for one reason, and one reason only: to tell the other characters that they do not identify either male or female. We don't even get a story about how their family life is. We don't get to see their mental health and how it's impacted for having to fight for their identity. We don't see other characters giving them a hard time. We get absolutely nothing. Nil. Zero. It's lazy. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to see someone have a difficult time, but if you don't show your audience why we should like somebody and care about one, then subsequently we feel nothing about them, and we don't care. I thought having this new character could have provided the opportunity for a rich story, and I was extremely let down. It felt like they'd only included this character to tick a criteria box and not for any form of entertainment or narrative value. It was genuinely such a disappointment, and I can't believe that Sex Education of all shows did this. Lastly, I feel like Season 3 started handing out screen time a tiny bit too much. When the first season aired, we had roughly 8 main characters. In Season 3, there's 17. 17! They've more than doubled! In a show where previously each character has had a main arc, having 17 on the go in one season is obviously going to result in an overall disappointing amount of boring and surface level storylines with no real compelling stakes. Take Jackson for example. I only just realised I've used him for almost every example, but I don't care. I think he's awesome. Jackson, the golden boy of the school, what does he really get up to this year? He tries hallucinogens. That's it. He loses head boy status after the new headmistress comes in, tries drugs, likes Cal, and that's it. Jesus man, what a boring arc. Season 3 really just handles itself in an odd way. In previous seasons, it was attempting to recreate the fears and exciting emotions of being a teenager in a free environment, but in this season, it's like as if they decided that was actually a really bad idea, and they overhauled the character's environment by having a new headmistress who was more like a head dictator. The show really felt claustrophobic in the school this season. It's such a shame, but in their defense, it is difficult to retain such a high quality level of writing. At some point, the show would begin to show a few cracks. Now, I want us all to just take a second, okay? Let's take a moment to think about that again. I expected the show to have a few cracks. Cracks, okay? Are we all clear on my wording? Awesome. When a show begins to exist for a few seasons, a few cracks begin to appear. Sure. But do you know what is quite unexpected? When its next and final season almost completely shatters from those cracks. If you have either not seen the show or forgotten, Season 4 of Sex Education is set in a new school called Cavendish College, and my god, why? The new school is a caricature of exactly what Sex Education was previously defined by avoiding: patronizing the audience. Looking back to Seasons 1 and 2, Sex Ed never treated its audience like idiots. It's why the show was so loved. You weren't made to feel like a message was being scolded at you every time you press play. Now, with Season 4, that approach appears to have been dumped. Taking place a few months after the previous season, Maeve and Otis are officially together. Maeve, however, is now living in the US, chasing her dreams and becoming a writer in a prestigious school. So how does this affect Otis?
Go away. Text.
Yep, pretty badly. He, as well as the remaining cast, and I say it this way due to the amount of characters who were just dropped from the show, are now enrolled at the pastel-plastered Cavendish College. The school's unique identity is that it is run by the students. They refer to it as a progressive environment where being overly nice and loving is the norm. Now, I know this makes me sound incredibly miserable, but in my defense, this school's idea of repressing any negative emotions is one of the most infuriating things I've ever watched. Anyway, what else made this season so bad in my eyes? Besides the annoying school, the season just had an underwhelming atmosphere. I know Sex Education never praised itself for having high-stakes storylines, but it always managed to tell multiple stories which were entertaining and funny. In this season though, I really feel like there was only one storyline which legitimately mattered, and if you haven't seen the show, you're going to be surprised by this. It's Adam and Michael's. When we left them both at the end of the last season, we saw both men attempting to find their own ways in life. Season 4 took this and decided to send it out with a bang. After discovering that his future may lie with animals and not education, Adam takes on an apprenticeship on a farm. He still makes the same clumsy mistakes as old Adam would, but he now seems like he's in the perfect environment for his mindset. We've always seen Adam care about animals, so this placement makes you realise that this is most likely the best place for him to be. It's great seeing this character finally in a position where he's not having to pretend he's someone he's not. It allows for him to reach out a little more, create new relationships, and also build upon previous ones. Another thing which was fantastic about Adam's position this season is allowed him to be kinder to himself. After the frustrations of not knowing his sexuality in the first seasons, and then the eventual heartbreak from Eric in season 3, Adam was in a position of perpetual irritation. It's because of this that, for me, he was the joint star of this season, allowing himself the time and care to work on his place in mind, admit his sexuality to someone who he likes, and work on his relationship with his bully father. Adam Groff, to me, had a fitting end. It was beautiful, heartfelt, funny, and most importantly, genuine. I'm so happy the writers managed to do Adam right. And this seems like a nice segue to the only other character who stole the show this season in my eyes, and that is Adam's father, Michael Groff. Oh boy! Now this is where it gets very good.
Remembering back to season 3, Michael was spending his time learning to like himself and attempting to find what makes him happy. He found this through the form of cooking and decides to leave his previous life as a headmaster behind. He starts getting creative, quickly finding passion in it, and just as quickly used it to create a bridge between his now separated family. He also states that he is doing therapy, which is helping him understand his thoughts on himself and why he hates himself so much. Taking this approach to the character who at the start of the show had no likable qualities was a long shot, yet somehow the writers demonstrated perfectly how to redeem a character. It's so touching to see Michael take the truth from his son about the way he treated him and not attempt to give excuses for it. It's then just as touching to finally see Michael open his heart up to Adam just before watching him demonstrate how good of a job he is doing in his apprenticeship. It's for these reasons why I think that Michael shares the honour of character who stole the show alongside his son. The chapter comes to a final close on a wonderful note. Michael is not yet fully accepted back into the family home, but he is invited inside so the family can share some time together. It's a beautiful send-off, and I'm so happy they managed to create a feel-good ending for two characters who sorely deserved it. Amy's story this season for me could be defined as a love and hate sort of standpoint. On one hand, I love how she uses photography and art to get over her trauma, and I hate the fact that this shitbag hasn't been disposed of yet. Giving Amy the opportunity to find a way to healthily deal with her trauma by expressing it through an artistic medium allows for her to turn her suffering into something beautiful. Jokes aside, I really didn't like the forced feelings between Amy and Isaac. It just didn't make sense to me why these specific two characters would get together. Prior to this season, they really had no chemistry. Actually, I take that back, they've got no chemistry here either. Now, I really hate to say this, but these were the only two things I enjoyed about the season. Every other part I either felt nothing towards, or was not a fan of. Let's jump into the real problems. Starting with my favourite character, Jackson in this season finds himself in a weird situation. He's got no hobbies or extracurricular activities going for him, he's doing neither great nor poor in his studies, and he only appears to have one friend, Viv. After he and Cal shared a connection which didn't work out in the previous season, Jackson decided that they needed some time apart. So they're not friends now. Stella. After getting his anus explored and testes drained by a fling, Jackson discovers a lump. Fearing it may be cancerous, he asks his mothers if there's a chance his biological father's genes could contain cancer. This leads him down the path of discovery that was his birth. Viv has quite a strong storyline this season, I will happily admit. She finds herself in the horrific position of becoming part of an abusive relationship with a new character called Beau. It's pretty well done, to be fair. It's actually very uncomfortable to witness certain scenes between the pair, and it makes you want to just jump through the screen to help her. However, just like Jackson's story, I do have my issues. I'm gonna leave that for a while though, and come back to it later. Returning to probably my most controversial take, Ruby's storyline this season is god-awful. I know I've already been harsh about this character, but this is my video, so I shall say what I want. Fight me on it. Ruby spends this season in a very boring place. She's being ignored by people in the new school and has fallen down the popularity ladder. I am going over that quite quickly, but that really is the extent. She does end up sort of being Otis's campaign manager for his duel against O, but that eventually falls apart. I thought this was such a shallow and half-assed effort storyline for a character which suddenly boomed in popularity. The fact that you could sum up her story in this season as her not being popular anymore is really embarrassing. Oh well. Jean! Oh, how I miss this character. Even though I felt like her character took a bit of a back step in the previous season, I still adore seeing her on screen. In my opinion, Jean's storyline this season was actually pretty solid. After the birth of Joy and the outing of the knowledge that Jakob was not the birth father, Jakob leaves. Yeah, he just straight up dipped. Man said not my problem faster than Eric can cheat on one of his new love interests. Following the birth and Jakob's Batman impersonation, Jean proceeds to raise Joy as a single mother. This doesn't seem to be going very well though, and is made very clear, very quickly, that she is suffering from it. It's later diagnosed in the season that she is in fact suffering from postpartum depression, but it takes her a little while to fully appreciate that and to give herself a break. The only bad thing I have to say about Jean this season is that a lot of the character personality traits that we were used to seeing in her are completely absent. She's nowhere near as confident as she usually is, she makes less and less unintentionally funny moments and comments with Otis, and she stops engaging with a lot of the cast. Most of her screen time is spent with her annoying ass sister Joanna, whom I wish never joined the show, and Joy. Joanna was called in by Otis to help his mother due to her struggle, and we swiftly come to learn that Joanna is simply unbearable. We do eventually learn that she has a lot of trauma for her childhood with abuse from her mother's boyfriend, which is meant to explain her actions, but it's revealed so late in the show that it's hard to really connect with her. That's all the time I'm going to dedicate towards this woman. I refuse to discuss her anymore. She's too annoying. Fuck off. With this very limited cast interaction, Jean's potential for comedic moments do take a back step this season. She does have a few standout scenes. All credit goes to actress Gillian Anderson again, but nothing compares to her previous seasons. She's starting a new job, which is pretty much her old job, but now as a former podcast, but the only thing is that she's really struggling with it. Due to her diagnosis, Jean's finding it terribly difficult to get back into the swing of things while juggling a job at the same time. It's not exactly the most exciting final season, but I can most certainly appreciate the honesty of the situation. I've already praised Sex Ed for its fair representation of issues, and Jean's were no different. Cal this season is, well, they're a little different to last season. At the time of writing this script, I haven't seen season 3 in a while, so I may be wrong in what I'm about to say. Hi, post-production Shroom here. Yeah, I'm not wrong. But Cal never showed any symptoms of depression or suicide in the previous season. Being a trans teen is obviously a battle for anyone. You could say this without even meeting the individual in question yet. But for Cal, they never felt like there was an underlying hatred for who they were, or some inner turmoil which filled them with rage. Before season 4, they didn't display suicide traits. I'd also argue that they didn't particularly display any of these traits throughout this new season. So why on earth did they suddenly find themselves on top of a cliff after being reported missing? We start the season witnessing Cal taking testosterone medication and their recorded journey of transformation. I thought this was going to be quite interesting. I was wrong. Over the course of the season, they have a few moments where they do seem hurt and frustrated that this process is seeming to take so long. But at no point did I hear alarm bells ringing for this character. At no point did I turn to my girlfriend and say, I think they're setting up the basis for a suicide storyline. I'm struggling to find the correct word for how I felt about this writing. The best, but potentially quite harsh, way I could describe the writing here was that it just didn't feel convincing. Without the proper setup, we just didn't see the character really struggle. And I mean really struggle. In order to emote these feelings within an audience, you absolutely have to connect us to the character. And this is something that I strongly feel the writers just never managed to get right with Cal. They had the opportunity, and they had the support, they just didn't do it. I don't care what anyone has to say to me, Cal continues to be a completely wasted character in my eyes. Now we get to talk about the exciting new characters. Abby and Roman are a couple. Abby is obsessed with positivity and doesn't want to have sex with Roman at the minute because he makes a weird noise. This dry spell upsets Roman. Aisha is their other friend. She's deaf. She likes gossip, but she isn't allowed to because of Abby's bloody positivity vibe, and she's polyamorous. Okay, now that I've managed to explain the most well thought out and complex characters in the history of television, let's return to our old characters. Eric is less of an asshole this season, but I still think he's not a nice guy. He spends a lot of time this season with Abby, Roman, and Aisha as opposed to Otis. It's pretty much exactly what he's always wanted. He's around people who are more like him than the people he was used to dealing with in Moordale High, and, what makes it better, they're also the popular kids of the school. This sort of puts Eric in a weird place though. Eric in this season is repeating the same storyline that he has in season 1. He thinks that he and Otis are too different and Otis doesn't understand him. This in itself will be pretty boring as it's just a repeat, but the thing what bothers me most, I think, is that you could argue he was manipulated to believe this by his new friends, and we, the audience, have seen first-hand evidence that that's simply not true. If you think back to the previous seasons, Otis dressed up in drag to attend an event for Eric. Otis chooses to dance with Eric at the school event when everybody is just staring at him, judging him. Otis was happy to attend the gay club for Eric. Otis believed that Eric was too good for his ex-bully. Yes, we come to learn that this was the other way around. But do you see what I mean? Even though their friendship is far from perfect, they have a lot of problems, I grant them, and Otis is also quite an asshole, I think it's really unfair that Eric suddenly decided that they needed time apart simply because he wouldn't listen. Then again, their friendship was so messy, I think you could definitely make an argument for both of them, explaining their toxic-ish relationship. Outside of his and Otis's friendship, Eric has a little bit of a weird storyline this season. He's struggling with getting baptized because he doesn't know if the church will accept him for being a gay man. Now on its own, there's nothing weird about that. But the thing that I find a little weird is, didn't they already know? Maybe I was mistaken, but I could have sworn that Eric had already made his sexuality known to his family and church when he was going through his phase of learning to love himself. Either way, it was quite a nice storyline, which I think had that old feel of prime sex education to it. It nicely handled that area of being relatable to certain members of the audience, all the while respecting both sides of the argument that is religion and sexuality. Okay, back to the main two characters. This season, Otis finds himself at war with another student sex therapist called O for the title of student sex counselor. Following the events of season 3, Otis and Maeve's previous clinic has closed its doors due to Maeve now living in the US, leaving Otis to continue the clinic both by himself and in a new environment. I won't lie, this was boring as hell. After season 1, I found myself really starting to struggle with liking Otis. Let's not sugarcoat it, he's always been a petulant child, but this season was ridiculous. Oh, she stole my idea. Dude, therapy was not your idea. Both your parents do it for a living, for God's sake. How narrow-minded and selfish have you got to be to actually convince yourself that you were doing any of this only to help people? You started this clinic because Maeve gave you the butterflies and you got money out of it. I'm stopping myself before I just end up cursing him to death. So, after the man-child stops crying about O being better at this than him, he decides that they should go head-to-head. Let the students decide. Okay, surely he handled this with dignity and ethically, right? Wrong. Otis hires his ex-girlfriend, who still cares about him, to be his campaign manager, and decides that staying the night with her in her house, bed, cuddled up, is the best option. Oh, and to make that better, he decides to not tell Maeve about this until she returns to Moordale days after it has happened. That, apparently, in Otis's head, was the best approach to handle this. Oh my god, it's such a shit show. It's a monumental shit show. How on earth are we still supposed to like the protagonist when he does everything but the right thing at every chance he gets? Again, I've got to move on before I get too disappointed in the terrible handling of this character and his appalling actions. Maeve is now studying in America. It's a cool premise. It's a shame that we don't get to spend much time there. Do you remember Maeve's mother from the previous seasons? Well, after losing her daughter to CPS in the previous, she dies of an overdose, leaving Maeve to come back to Moordale in order to plan the funeral. When she gets back, she's immediately different to how she was in America. To be fair, her mum did just die. We saw a very smiley Maeve in America, and she reverts to the all we remember as soon as she gets back to Moordale, and she's not very compassionate when Amy asks her about her potentially moving forward with Isaac. I mean, I don't understand how you could still be thinking about him, but okay, you do you, I guess, Maeve. It's also as soon as she gets back to Moordale that she decides she suddenly isn't able to make it as a writer. It's a little jarring, but okay. and that's pretty much Maeve's part in the story. Now, considering that this is an analysis of sex education and its characters, it would be very unfair if I didn't thoroughly dissect every main one of them. However, I'm a little hesitant to discuss O. Introduced as the new character in this season, and Otis's rival, O is the much more highly accomplished sex therapist of Cavendish. The main reason that I'm hesitant, though, is because I don't really have anything to say. She's not particularly a nice person, she doesn't really do anything funny, she comes across as quite calculating and cold, and then she uses her sexuality as a defense mechanism, which is quite a bad thing to do. I just didn't see much in her other than that. I've seen other creators delve into this character, and it's done brilliantly, but I just think I've nothing new or interesting to add. The only thing I will say though is how it's fascinating to see why her characters seem to be so cruel. Originally, Otis was actually seen taking more moves to paint a poor picture of O, so she retaliated in the same fashion. But in the final version we saw, all of Otis's scenes were cut. This left the audience to witness O's actions without any sort of motive. And I assume this was to get us to like Otis more, but if that was the case, God, they missed the mark. If it wasn't obvious already, I had a lot to say about some characters and nearly nothing on others. And I think that is the best way of explaining my disappointment in this season. Some characters I felt I could really dive into and explore, but then others felt very surface level. Obviously, this is just one guy's thoughts, I am not speaking on the behalf of anybody else, but I haven't spoken to anyone who's had a different opinion. I think this speaks volumes to the writing of this season. I was always able to spot flaws in the earlier ones, sure, and there were definitely times before this season when I think the writing was getting a bit off topic and losing itself, but this season took the cake for the absolute butchery towards sex education's previous identity and standing. Nothing to me explains that more than the abundance of comedy in this season. Seriously, I can't be the only person who thinks this. This season, straight up, no sugarcoating, it was the least funny season of the show, and 100% one of the blandest seasons out of a large portion of teen comedies. As I'm writing this script, I'm struggling to think of more than one point where I actually laughed. Gene's new boss, whose name I've forgotten, did get a few blows of air out of my nose, but that's really about it. That classic cringe comedy which sex education thrived on? The most relatable part of being a teenager in the UK? Yep, it's just completely gone. Instead, we're forced to bear witness to this new version of sex education, where all of our characters feel like there's an underlying layer of misery to them in a world which has literally lost its colour. Cavendish, and most of the show, now consist of pastel colours. I've seen a lot of creators discuss this as quite a nice visual move, and I totally get where they're coming from, but in my opinion, it looks like the show is physically being drained of its life essence. It doesn't quite give off the same vibe as Mordale High under Hope's regime in Season 3, but it's the same sort of feeling. It feels like the saturation of the show is almost reverting back to grayscale again. It makes it visually look like the show is dying. And that is exactly how I would define this season. It doesn't feel like an ending to the show. It feels like it's dying. The colour of its identity is being washed away and is draining from its body. So, with all that being said, let's talk about that. Let's talk about sex education's ending. I'm just going to get it out of the way right now. I hate the ending to sex education. It is probably one of the most underwhelming endings I have ever seen. It didn't kill anyone, no, nor did it do something pitifully irreversible. It just didn't satisfy. And no, not the Walking Dead levels of dissatisfaction by ending the show just to market the new shows, but instead more like the ending to Game of Thrones. The characters didn't feel like their stories were completed correctly. Now, let me elaborate. Here are the final moments of sex education and the final places of these characters. Jackson turns out to be the product of an affair, and not actually the result of a sperm donor in a book which his mother's made for him. Better yet, his father wants nothing to do with him. He viciously scolds him when he arrives at his door, and then threatens him to never ever come back. This, understandably, depresses the shit out of ex-Golden Boy. But then his mother's tell him that they love him, and they all have a nice cuddle, and his growth is diagnosed as non-cancerous. And that right there is the ending of Jackson's story. Are you fucking kidding? Viv ends the relationship with Bo. Pretty much that simple. Nothing of huge change happens. Like, it's good. Don't get me wrong. We're all for non-abusive relationships existing. But, okay. Ruby decides to not like Otis anymore, and then she decides to join the popular group. So, she doesn't really change. Amy does come to address her trauma through artistic impression and photography, and she seems to finally be letting go of it. This was actually amazing. I really liked this. It's such a shame that you ended up with this twat. Jean manages to crack the formula of juggling a job and being a full-time mother. Doesn't really connect with Otis that much though, which is something which does bother me, probably a little bit too much, but if you think back to the entire span of the show, Jean and Otis have multiple fights where their main problem is that they aren't able to connect with one another. This is something that I thought the ending was gonna bring together and give us a good conclusion. Maybe they were gonna finally learn to understand each other, but no, Otis is pissed at Jean again because she sent my girlfriend back to America. Jesus Christ. Otis and Jean's relationship hasn't changed from season 1. Otis still finds her infuriating and has a short temper for anything she does, and Jean continues to misunderstand everything that Otis tries to tell her. They never got over this hurdle. But how can this happen? How is this even possible? How can you write a clear obstacle for two important characters to overcome together, but end the show with them not doing that? It's not like they decided to go their separate ways or anything. They're mother and son. He's underage. He still lives with her. They haven't got the opportunity to end this show without making progress on that relationship. And in my eyes, they don't. And I know some other people will have some different opinions, and that's fine, but to me, this was incredibly bad writing. Cal decides that they don't want to commit suicide almost as fast as they decided that they apparently wanted to, and they then end the show by laying in their bedroom with their mum and saying, "I'm not ready to see everyone yet." That's it! That's the ending for this character! That, for me, is the nail on the head. Cal, they could have been great. They could have been lovable, but they were underused and they were misrepresented. I'm so disappointed with the writing for this character, I'm just gonna move on. Abby and Roman have sex. Aisha gets irritated that people don't treat her the best way for her hearing disability, so she takes a moment when all the students are assembled to explain how she doesn't feel respected enough. It's fine. Eric decides not to get baptized, talks directly to God, and then decides he wants to become a pastor. An inclusive pastor. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think this was a bad end, but it just felt like it was a little random. Obviously, religion has always been a large part of Eric's character, but I didn't think there was ever a possibility that he would want to pursue it for almost a career. I did think, though, that God being a black person was a nice callback to season 1, where Eric questions why Jesus couldn't be black. I did like that. May returns to America shortly after banging Otis. I'll admit, when I first saw this ending for them, I really wasn't the biggest fan. I thought it was slightly annoying how we waited years to see these two characters get together, and they never properly do. But after having time to digest this and think about it properly, I think this was actually 100% the best move, not only for the characters, but also us as the audience. You see, I'm going to pretend to be really profound now. If you think back to when you were the age of 16 or 17, you were most likely a completely different person with a completely different set of ideas, thoughts, feelings, and different love interests. Growing up, you learn more about love and where people stand in your life. When I think back to where I was at mentally and socially in that time, I almost see a completely different person. And the people who I was romantically involved with back then, I'm not with those people today. Hell, they're not even in my life anymore. And that, ladies and gents, is life. That's the norm. Starting a relationship then and dictating your future around those decisions are so rare and can potentially be quite harmful. And this is why I have actually grown to like the decision for Otis and Maeve to go their separate ways. I think it's an important lesson for younger people. You can meet influential people who will go on to help shape the person you're going to become. But just because they were influential and important then, doesn't mean that they're going to stick around forever. And that's the beauty of growing up. Okay, now that I can stop trying to sound like a philosophical asshole, Maeve was struggling this season with her confidence. In America, she was in a position of feeling like she had a chance, and then feeling that she wasn't going to be able to make it due to her professor's harsh words. Playing with anyone's emotions like that would be enough to kill their motivation, so the fact that Jean is the person who reassures Maeve that no one is capable of stopping her from reaching her dreams, now that is good. I did not feel this way initially, but with the benefit of hindsight, I can now see how narrow-minded I was being. Maeve having the courage, bravery and resilience to leave Moordale behind and head back to America was such a fitting end for her character. And finally, we have her ex. Let's discuss our protagonist, Otis Milburn. You may think from the way that I've been ranting about the terrible handling of Cal that I believe they're the worst character on the show. If you do find yourself thinking that, you'd be wrong, but I can understand why you would think that. I am so insanely confused about the character of Otis. By process of elimination, he is the main character of this show. Yes, so is Maeve, and we have many other prominent characters, but Otis is the protagonist. So can we please just take a moment to ask, how in the hell he made zero progress in his arc over the course of an entire show in which he is the main character? If you disagree or find yourself not understanding how I found myself at this conclusion, let me explain my thought process. When we begin the show, Otis is a background guy. He doesn't stand out. Popular kids in school don't have a care for him. His only real connection is with Eric. He struggles with his mother due to her having boundary issues and misunderstanding him. He's incredibly awkward and often puts himself in bad situations due to him panicking in any situation where he isn't comfortable. He has no girlfriend, no real idea for his future, and is petrified of sex. Now, did anybody else notice that, besides the sex phobia, I just unironically explained Otis in the final moments of the show? He's a background guy. He doesn't stand out. Popular kids in school don't care about him. His only real connection is with Eric. He struggles with his mother due to her boundary issues and misunderstanding him. He's incredibly awkward and often puts himself in bad situations due to him panicking in any situation where he is uncomfortable. He has no girlfriend and he has no real idea what's in his future. 4 seasons later, and Otis Milburn has progressed by exactly 1%. The lead character. Michael Groff had a better character arc than that, and they used to make him do shit like this!
Just take those old records off the shelf. I said listen to 'em.
I don't think I'm capable of explaining why this is such cataclysmic writing, but I'm going to try. There are 4 types of character arcs. You've got the morally ascending arc, the morally descending arc, the transformational arc, and the flat arc. The morally ascending arc is designed to push the hero past their flaws and to either achieve victory or to do the right thing. The morally descending arc is used in characters who give in to the darkness and usually let it alter them completely. The transformational arc is for characters who go from zero to hero. It covers characters who become the chosen one and bring about the change while also inspiring it within others. And the flat arc is for a character who doesn't particularly change. These characters have a mindset and usually end where they started. They can be used for main protagonists, but it has to be executed well, otherwise you're left with a character who just isn't very exciting to watch. Now let's think back to Otis. Which of these 4 types accurately fit his character arc? Flat, the laziest option. Truth be told though, I don't think the writers were aware of their actions. I think Otis was a character who they understood in season 1, but weren't really able to figure out what they wanted to do with him post season 1. Even though he was presented with multiple points in the story where he could have taken the opportunity to grow and learn from his actions, Otis continues to act only with himself in mind at every turn throughout the show. These character tropes are fine to start with, but in order for a character to earn any sort of respect and likableness from an audience, then they need to prove they can learn and grow from these mistakes. It would have been fine for Otis to start the series as a selfish man-child, but he should have ended the show as a less selfish, or better yet selfless, young man. I'm struggling to understand why this approach wasn't taken. So in the final moments of Otis and Maeve's relationship, they spend the night together. Maeve reveals to Otis that she wants to go back to America, and Otis decides their relationship won't survive it. In the morning, they say their final goodbyes, and Maeve leaves. Eventually, Otis realizes that Jean is the person who convinced Maeve to go back to America, and he handles it with just as much respect and grace as you would expect.
You crossed a line. And I was all worried you were having another mental breakdown, but no, you're just consistently fucking with everything in my life. Okay.
Jean explains that this was the best thing to happen to Maeve, and that he should want that for her. Eventually, and after more childish arguing and pointless shit from Otis's end, he gives in. I know it sounds like I'm nitpicking at this point, but this also really annoys me. Even in his final scenes of the show, Otis continues to be a selfish and spoiled little brat. I just don't get it. The writers here could have decided, maybe for once we should let Otis arrive at this conclusion on his own. Maybe, instead of having someone tell him he's in the wrong, we could leave the viewers believing that after the final credits roll, Otis is finally showing signs of growth and change. That's what they could have decided to do, but they didn't. I guess this will just be it for him. Otis is now going to be forever immortalized in this show as a rude, narrow-minded, petulant man-child who only ever thinks about himself. A-star, writers, A-star. If you love this show as much as I did when it first came out, you may find yourself sitting there thinking, what happened? And if you are, I'm certain you're not the only one. Sex Education managed to garner such an excellent reception when it was first released, so how did it, in my opinion, become this tragic fall from grace? I've already touched on these points by now, but I'm going to take this opportunity to go over them again in a little less detail so it's easier to follow. To begin, the show forgot that one of its core features was normalizing diversity. Enter Season 3 and a few problems begin to show. Enter Season 4 and they fully just butchered their own identity. The new characters involved seem to only be intertwined with the story and characters for one reason: messages. Cal, Abby, Isaac, Aisha, Roman, they're just messages now. Their personalities and individual uniqueness, they just don't have them, they're completely absent. Secondly, Sex Education used to be funny, either through perfectly performed and executed comedic timing, or through scenes of intentional cringe. The show felt alive and happy. Enter Season 3, Hope sucked the life out of the school and the characters, and in Season 4, Cavendish just felt fake. Season 3 had a few laughs, but Season 4 had next to none. They forgot that being a teenager is a funny time in your life. You and your friends should be spending most of your time having a laugh and enjoying the freedom of being young. But Sex Education decided that, in its final moments, comedy was not an important part of its character anymore, and we, the audience, should choose to remember this show for its new appearance: lifeless, cold, and depressing. Building on the idea of Sex Education portraying teen years in a relatable way which highlighted them as an exciting period of your life, this was the next largest error the show generated for itself. When you were 17, you would be learning how to drive, opening the world up to you, spending time with friends, going to parties, and exploring sex. The atmosphere at the end of the show, though, it couldn't have felt any more different to this mentality if it tried. It was now just about ending these characters, but it was done in a way where it made growing up look depressing, hard, upsetting, and toxic. It was making teenage years something not to anticipate with excitement, but rather to dread. This goes against everything that the show ever wanted to portray. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but take a look at the colours from the first season, and then look at what they turned into. It's like a post-production team just turned down the saturation by 100% in Season 3, and 70% in Season 4. Identity Crisis number 4, every character's arc throughout the final season is a negative one. Yes, throughout the show, there have been many negative storylines which have decided to show the obstacles of growing up and the harsh reality of it, but they had positive storylines to go alongside them. But if you take a moment to consider Season 4, nothing positive happened for the characters. In Season 1, Otis learned he was good at something and began making a positive impact, all the while getting closer to a girl. In Season 4, Otis lost this talent, stopped making an impact, and lost the girl. Season 1 Eric learned to love himself for who he is. Season 4 Eric was made to feel rejected by this religion, a large part of his identity and beliefs. Season 1 Jean was finally learning to open back up to relationships and others while maintaining her career. In Season 4, Jean lost her relationship, suffered heartbreak, and then remembered how to be a mother after a difficult journey of depression, which she hasn't improved on. You see what I mean? The stories don't have any positive sides to them anymore, which makes the more difficult arcs feel like they weren't worth the end results. To build on the problems with stories, everything towards the end of the show really just felt like the most extreme possibilities that could happen to these characters. Season 1 Maeve was struggling to feel motivated to build a life for herself, thinking she wasn't going to get there. In Season 4, Maeve loses her mother to an overdose, has to organise the funeral with a brother who worries her, and leaves everyone she knows behind. Season 1 Jackson felt pressure from his mothers to be good at swimming. Season 4 Jackson may have cancer, learns he was the product of an affair, and completely shatters his view of himself. Season 3 Cal had moments where they felt tired having to explain and fight for their identity. Season 4 Cal wanted to kill themselves. Where before the storylines were grounded in reality and were presenting low-stake consequences, the final iteration of the show seemed to take a leaf out of Riverdale's book and just decided to explode these levels of realism with exaggerated ideas of the most extreme circumstances. It just didn't feel fitting. The tone of the entire show took a massive shift with big-stake, depressing stories, and it completely suffered from it. This is not what Sex Education was. It's a real shame to see that this is where they decided to leave it. So, how should I end this analysis? After reviewing it for however long I have at this point, you'd think I'd already know exactly what words to use to sum it up. But in truth, I don't think I do. You see, this is my first time ever actually reviewing anything. Sure, I've discussed my thoughts on cinema and shows with family and friends before, but I've never documented my thoughts and put them together into a video. And the more and more I wrote about this show, the more and more disappointed I began to feel. When Sex Education aired, I was skeptical. I wanted a good show to watch, but I didn't know if that's what the public was about to get. By the gift of the gods, though, it was. I stand by the idea that Sex Education is one of the best teen shows of modern television. It was full of life, character, comedy, brutal honesty, and love. It managed to create a version of being a teenager which felt gritty and realistic, all while keeping us invested and rooting for these amazing characters who you wanted to see succeed. However, it was season 3 and 4 for me which changed the show into exactly what it previously stood against. The show arrived at a very good point in time, but in my opinion, it outstayed its welcome. Season 3 could have been a better season if they had tried harder, and could have been a satisfying conclusion to these characters had they decided it was going to be the end. I think Sex Education perfectly embodies the quote,
"You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain."
and that is where I think I should leave this review. Goodbye, Sex Education. I'm sorry your final act brought so many problems. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I've always wanted to make content like this, but I've never really known if I could, so this little experiment has been very fun to make. If you have anything to add, or simply want to say you either liked or disliked anything I said, then please feel free to comment. I'm really passionate about media. I've loved books, I've loved movies, I've loved video games. Any sort of storytelling has always been a very big part of my life, and I'm very passionate to voice my opinions. We all deserve better than the vast amount of garbage that has been and is being pumped out by media companies, and the only way we can ever hope for better is by starting that change for ourselves. Anyway, goodbye for now, thank you for watching, and I will see you again soon.